I never thought the sound of an espresso machine could make my stomach twist. But that day, sitting in the corner of the airport lounge, it felt like the hiss of the steam was mocking me. I cradled a paper cup in my hands, the coffee long gone cold, and stared at the sliding glass doors that led back into the terminal. 8 hours earlier, my daughter Maya had pressed this cup into my hands with a quick smile and said, "Mom, we'll just be an hour. Check-in lines are crazy. You'll be more comfortable here." She'd kissed my cheek, Ethan trailing behind her with our carry-ons, and then they'd vanished into the crowd. An hour. That's what she'd said. The lounge was a strange kind of quiet. Not silent, but muffled. Luggage wheels clicking against the tile. Polite coughs. The occasional low voice of a businessman talking into a headset. Outside, planes glided along the tarmac like giant, slow-moving birds. I told myself I'd see Maya waving at me soon, maybe with some silly story about how long the baggage counter line had been. But the minutes stretched. My phone battery dipped to 40%. At first, I didn't worry. Maya has always been efficient. She organizes every detail down to the second. If she said an hour, it would be an hour. Maybe a few minutes over, but never more. She'd been like that since she was a little girl. Even when she was 7 and I was driving her to ballet class, she'd sit in the back seat reminding me, "We need to leave at 4:10, Mom, or I'll be late for warm-ups." But as the second hour passed, my coffee cup was empty, and my neck ached from craning toward the door. I scrolled through my phone. No messages. I sent one. "All good? Should I meet you at the gate?" No reply. The third hour came and went. I noticed the staff in the lounge had started rotating out for new shifts. The girl at the coffee counter who'd taken my first order was replaced by a man in a crisp vest. He smiled politely at me, as if I'd been there all day, which I had. By hour 4, my legs felt heavy, my heart heavier. The travelers around me changed like a time lapse. Families rushing in, grabbing quick snacks, vanishing again. No one stayed. No one except me. The 5th hour came, then the 6th. I kept telling myself there must be a reason. Maybe there had been an issue with security. Maybe they were stuck in customs somehow. Maybe they were holding my boarding pass and waiting for a last-minute boarding call. Then hour 7 arrived, and the lounge started to empty for the night. I checked the departures board. Flight 642 to Paris. Departed. I stared at that word until the letters blurred. Departed. My fingers were shaking as I dialed Maya. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I sat back in my chair, the weight of what I was seeing pressing down like a stone on my chest. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't bad timing. They were gone. They had left without me. The truth hit me like turbulence in the pit of my stomach, the kind that makes you grip the armrest and pray for it to stop. I looked at the cup in my hands, the thin brown ring at the bottom where the last drop had dried hours ago. That was the last thing they'd given me before disappearing, a cup of coffee and a promise they had no intention of keeping. A man a few seats away glanced at me. Maybe because I was pale, or maybe because he could see in my face that something had broken. I tried to smile, to hide the humiliation clawing its way up my throat, but it felt like swallowing glass. For the first time in my life, I felt truly disposable. And the worst part? This wasn't just about the flight. This was about every little moment before it. Every time I'd been pushed to the side, every time my presence was treated like an afterthought. I just hadn't wanted to see it until now. 8 hours earlier, I thought I was going to Paris with my family. Now I realized I was just luggage they'd decided not to check in. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before that airport lounge, before the cold coffee and the hollow hours, my life felt steady, predictable, even warm in its own way. I'd been living in a modest 2-bedroom home in Dayton, Ohio, for the past 20 years. It wasn't grand. The siding could have used fresh paint, and the porch railing leaned slightly to the left, but it was mine. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon because I baked often, even when it was just for me. I liked things simple. Every Sunday, without fail, my daughter Maya and her husband Ethan would come over for dinner. It had started when they first got married. I wanted them to have one night a week where they didn't have to cook or clean. I'd make the same kind of hearty meals Maya grew up on: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed with garlic. She'd sit at the counter sipping tea while I worked, and we'd talk about her week, her job, and sometimes the little frustrations of married life. Ethan was polite, maybe a little quiet, but I appreciated that he always helped carry the dishes into the kitchen after dinner. It felt like we had a routine, a rhythm. When Maya first mentioned the Paris trip, it was over one of those Sunday dinners. I remember the way her eyes sparkled, the same sparkle she'd had when she was 10 years old and telling me about a school play she'd been cast in. "Mom," she said, reaching for another slice of bread, "we're going to Paris next month, and we want you to come with us." I laughed. Paris? Me? I'd never been out of the country. The farthest I'd gone was Florida, and that was for a teachers' conference back in '98. "Yes, you! You've never taken a real vacation," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You deserve it. And you can finally see the Eiffel Tower for yourself instead of on postcards." I felt my heart swell. It wasn't just the idea of Paris. It was that she wanted me there. I had always believed that no matter how much her life changed, there would still be a place for me in it. For the next few weeks, Paris became our favorite topic. We'd send each other links to must-see spots: the Louvre, Montmartre, the Seine at night. She even texted me a video of a cafe she said we should try because they had the best croissants in the city. I spent hours online reading travel blogs about Paris in spring, imagining myself walking through cobblestone streets, my scarf blowing in the breeze. I bought a new suitcase, deep burgundy with smooth rolling wheels, and splurged on a light trench coat because Maya said, "You'll fit right in with the Parisians." The week before the trip, she came by with Ethan to finalize details. She handled all the booking, and I trusted her completely. She told me I wouldn't have to worry about a thing. She'd have my boarding pass ready at the airport. All I had to do was show up. "We'll make it easy for you," she said with that quick, confident smile she'd had since she was little. "You just relax and enjoy the ride." And I believed her. I even contributed $20,500 toward the trip. I didn't think of it as paying for my own way. I thought of it as helping us all enjoy the experience without stress. When Maya thanked me, she hugged me tight and whispered, "It's going to be the trip of a lifetime, Mom." I remember thinking, not for the first time, how lucky I was to have a daughter who still wanted to spend time with me. Many women my age talk about how their kids are too busy for them. I thought I'd avoided that fate. In my mind, the trip wasn't just about seeing Paris. It was about cementing the bond we already had. A mother-daughter adventure. I imagined us taking silly photos by the Eiffel Tower, sharing pastries in the morning, and laughing together late into the night in our hotel room. Looking back, I realize how carefully I built that picture in my head, and how much it hurt when it started to crumble. But at the time, I had no reason to doubt her. No reason to think that the invitation was anything other than love. No reason to believe that just weeks later, I'd be sitting in that airport lounge alone, wondering how I could have been so wrong. At the time, I thought life was steady, safe. I didn't know yet that the ground under me was already cracking. The first time something felt off was during lunch at a little cafe downtown about a week before the trip. Maya had invited me out for a girls' afternoon. Her idea of catching up before we left for Paris. I was excited. We don't often get time just the two of us anymore. She breezed into the cafe 10 minutes late, phone in one hand, designer sunglasses in the other. She kissed my cheek quickly before sliding into the seat across from me. "Sorry, Mom, traffic was awful," she said, scrolling through something on her phone before finally setting it face down. "Anyway, I wanted to go over the trip details with you." I smiled. already picturing us walking along the Seine, but she was all business. "So, about the airport," she began, tearing a piece off her croissant. "It might be better if you just wait in the lounge once we get there. So you don't have to stand in those long check-in lines." I hesitated. "Oh, okay. But won't I need to be there when you check in?" "Not necessarily. We'll have your boarding pass ready, and we can handle the luggage. It'll just be easier if you're comfortable in the lounge while we take care of it." Her tone was light, but there was something dismissive in the way she said comfortable, like I was a child who couldn't manage in a grown-up space. I tried to make a joke of it. "Well, I suppose I can handle holding down a seat for an hour if it keeps you from stressing." Ethan, who had joined us midway through the conversation, chuckled and said, "It's just easier if you don't get caught up in the crowd." The way he said it, "don't get caught up in the crowd," stuck with me. It made me feel like they saw me as a burden, not a companion. But then Maya smiled at me and launched into talking about the restaurants she'd booked in Paris. And I told myself I was reading too much into it. That's what you do when you love someone. You smooth over the sharp edges. You decide their words couldn't possibly have meant what they sounded like. Still, the moment replayed in my head that night. I imagined standing alone in the lounge, sipping coffee while they bustled through check-in without me. It didn't feel like the start of a shared adventure. It felt like separation. The next day, I brushed it off. I told myself Maya was just being practical, trying to make things easy for me. She's always been a planner, always taken charge. It's one of the things I've admired about her. But in the days leading up to the trip, small moments kept popping up like tiny warning signs. I noticed she stopped looping me into the group text with Ethan about final plans. When I asked what time we'd be leaving for the airport, she said vaguely, "Don't worry about it, I'll let you know." I overheard her on the phone with a friend saying, "It'll be so much smoother this way." I didn't know what "this way" meant, but I felt it in my stomach. And yet, I still convinced myself it was nothing. I think deep down, I didn't want to admit that the little cracks in our relationship were showing. Not when we were on the brink of what I thought would be the best trip of my life. I told myself, don't ruin this with paranoia. Trust her. And so I did. I didn't know it then, but that "just wait in the lounge" conversation was the beginning of everything that would follow. The first red flag. And I folded it neatly away, pretending it wasn't there. In the week before the trip, something began to shift. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches or obvious arguments. It was more like a gradual cooling, the way a pot of tea loses its steam if you let it sit too long. It started with the group chat. At first, I thought it was just quiet, but then I realized they'd created a new one without me. I found out by accident when Maya mentioned a restaurant reservation she and Ethan had decided on. I said, "Oh, I didn't see that in the messages." And she replied, "Oh, right. I think I forgot to add you to the updated thread. It's fine, though. You'll find out when we get there." It wasn't just the messages. A few days later, I dropped by Maya's house to bring her a neck pillow I'd found for her flight. She was on the phone in the kitchen, laughing about something. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a second before she said into the phone, "I'll call you back." I couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't wanted me to hear the conversation. I tried to be helpful, but my offers kept getting brushed aside. When I suggested packing some snacks for the flight, she waved me off. "We'll eat in the lounge." When I offered to print backup copies of our tickets, she said, "We've got it covered, Mom." When I asked if there was anything she wanted me to bring, she smiled tightly and said, "Just yourself." On the surface, they were polite responses, but each one carried a subtle message. You're not part of the planning, you're just along for the ride. One evening, I invited them over for a casual dinner, my way of celebrating the trip before we left. I made pasta with homemade sauce and even baked a chocolate cake because Maya had always loved it as a child. But they showed up an hour late, full from grabbing a bite on the way. Maya barely touched her plate, and Ethan spent most of the meal checking his phone. After they left, I stood in the kitchen, wrapping up untouched slices of cake, wondering when exactly I'd become an afterthought in their lives. It was during one of those nights, sitting in my quiet living room with the TV on low, that I caught myself making excuses for them. They're just busy. They're stressed about the trip. Don't take it personally. But something deep inside me was beginning to understand. This wasn't about stress. It wasn't about busyness. It was about me slowly fading into the background of their lives and them being comfortable with it. I remembered how, when Maya was little, she used to run into my classroom after school, hugging me so hard my glasses would shift. She'd chatter all the way home, telling me every little detail about her day. Somewhere along the way, that openness had shrunk into short texts and polite nods. The trip had felt like a chance to bridge that gap, to laugh together again, to share something special. But now, it felt more like I was being managed, like a box they had to check before moving on to what they really wanted to do. By the time the night before the trip arrived, I was restless. I packed carefully, folding each shirt neatly, slipping my passport into a side pocket of my purse. I told myself this trip would bring us closer, that I was imagining the distance. I didn't know it yet, but I was already standing at the edge of the moment that would break us apart. And I was walking toward it with my eyes closed. It happened the night before our flight. Maya had invited a few friends over for what she called a bon voyage dinner at her place. She said it would be casual, just some wine, takeout, and good company before we headed to the airport the next afternoon. When I arrived, the living room was already crowded. There was music playing, the scent of garlic and butter from the takeout containers, and a hum of conversation. Maya was in the center of it all, holding a glass of wine and laughing at something Ethan's coworker had just said. "Mom, you made it," she called, giving me a quick hug before turning back to her circle of friends. I found a spot on the couch, next to a woman I didn't know, and smiled politely. The evening started out fine enough. People asked polite questions about where I was from, what I did before retirement, the kind of small talk you expect at gatherings where you don't know most of the faces. But after about an hour, the conversation turned toward the trip. One of Maya's friends, a tall woman with sleek blonde hair, asked, "So, will your mom be doing all the sightseeing with you guys?" Maya laughed. Not a gentle laugh, but the kind of sharp burst that draws other people's attention. "Oh no, we're bringing Mom along so she can keep our seats warm at the gate while we shop." The room erupted in chuckles. I froze, my wine glass halfway to my lips. I tried to laugh too, because that's what you do when the punchline is you. But my throat was tight, and the sound came out too thin. Ethan grinned and added, "Yeah, we've got it all worked out. She's our professional seat saver." There was more laughter. I forced a smile, but my face felt hot. My hands itched to put down the glass before I spilled it. I wanted to believe it was just a harmless joke, that they didn't mean anything by it. But the way Maya said it, light, dismissive, as if my entire role on this trip was to stay out of their way, felt like someone had yanked the rug out from under me. I thought about all the years I'd spent making her life easier, the mornings I got up early to drive her to school in the rain, the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for her plays, the weekends I gave up so she could have the best of everything. And now in a room full of strangers, I was a joke. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. I just sipped the wine, my cheeks burning, while the conversation moved on without me. A little while later, I excused myself to the kitchen to help with the dishes, though there weren't any to do. I stood by the counter, staring at the stack of plastic takeout containers, listening to the sound of Maya's laughter drifting in from the living room. I thought about leaving early, but I didn't want to make a scene. Instead, I waited until things wound down and quietly said my goodbyes. Maya kissed my cheek again, distracted, already talking to someone else. On the drive home, the city lights blurred through my windshield. I kept replaying that moment in my head, the laughter, the casual dismissal, the sting in my chest that felt far deeper than it should have. I told myself to shake it off, to not let one thoughtless joke ruin the trip I'd been looking forward to for weeks. But a part of me knew this wasn't just a joke. It was the truth, hidden inside a laugh. And soon, I'd find out just how literal it was. The next afternoon, I arrived at the airport 3 hours before our flight, just like Maya had told me. My suitcase rolled smoothly behind me, and I wore the new beige trench coat I'd bought for Paris. I felt a mix of excitement and nerves, the kind you get before a big adventure. Maya and Ethan were already at the curb when my cab pulled up. Maya was waving her phone, motioning me over. "Mom, perfect timing," she said brightly as I stepped out. "Let's get you inside." We moved through the sliding glass doors, the rush of cool air hitting my face. The terminal was busy, full of that distinct airport energy. Rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, the smell of coffee and jet fuel. We walked together toward the check-in counters, but before we reached them, Maya stopped short. She pointed toward the glass doors of the airport lounge just ahead. "Here's the plan," she said, pressing a paper coffee cup into my hand. "You go on in, get comfortable, and we'll handle check-in. No sense in you standing in those long lines with your knees acting up." I glanced at the counters just a few yards away. "I can stand in line. It's not a big deal." Ethan shook his head. Really, it'll be faster this way. We've got everything. Your passport, boarding pass, all of it. We'll be back before you finish that coffee." I hesitated, the sting from last night's seat saver joke still fresh in my mind. But Maya's smile was so quick, so sure, that I told myself not to make a fuss. "All right," I said softly. Inside, the lounge was warm and quiet, with wide leather chairs and soft lighting. A wall of windows looked out over the runway, where planes glided slowly toward takeoff. I found a seat near the corner, the kind of spot where you could watch everything without being in the way. "See? Perfect," Maya said, setting my suitcase beside me. "We'll be back in about an hour." I nodded, and they were gone. I sipped my coffee, glancing at the clock. 15 minutes passed, then 30. I told myself check-in lines could be long. Maybe security was backed up. An hour ticked by, then another. I wandered over to the buffet and made myself a small plate of crackers and cheese. I tried reading a magazine, but couldn't focus. Every few minutes I checked my phone, no messages. By the third hour, I began to feel uneasy. I texted Maya. "Everything okay?" No reply. At the 4-hour mark, the lounge began to feel less like a place of comfort and more like a waiting room I couldn't leave. I kept expecting to see their faces at any moment, carrying boarding passes and some story about the chaos at the gate. But they didn't come. The coffee cup on the side table beside me had gone cold. My scarf felt too warm around my neck. A hollow, sinking feeling was beginning to form in my stomach. The kind that whispers, you might already know the truth, but aren't ready to say it out loud. Still, I waited. Because that's what you do when you trust someone. You wait. By the 8th hour, I would learn just how misplaced that trust had been. By the 6th hour, the airport lounge felt like a cage. The same soft jazz music looped through the speakers. The same stale smell of reheated pastries hung in the air. The same polite staff member kept refilling the buffet table, glancing at me every so often like they weren't sure if I was waiting for someone or just stranded. I checked my phone again. Still nothing from Maya. I sent another text. "Boarding soon? Should I come to the gate?" The little delivered checkmark appeared, but no reply followed. At the 7th hour, the unease inside me began to solidify into something colder. My legs ached from sitting, so I decided to walk out into the terminal and check the departure boards. The screen was bright against the dim hallway. I scanned the list of flights until I found it. Flight 642, Paris, Charles de Gaulle. Departed 4:05 p.m. I stared at the word departed for so long the letters seemed to blur. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd read it wrong, but no, the flight was gone, hours ago. My breath caught in my throat. My hands began to shake so badly I almost dropped my phone. I called Maya, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. The reality hit me like a physical blow. They had boarded without me. The noise of the terminal seemed to fade into a dull roar. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. I felt hot and cold all at once, like my body couldn't decide whether to fight or collapse. I stumbled back into the lounge and sat down hard in the same leather chair where I'd been waiting all day. The coffee cup from earlier was still there, its last few drops dried into a dark ring at the bottom. I stared at it as if it held an answer. An older gentleman sitting a few seats away glanced at me. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked gently. I opened my mouth, but my voice wouldn't come. I just nodded quickly, forcing a small smile, as if admitting the truth out loud would make it more real. Inside, I felt like I was collapsing in on myself. I thought about all the moments that had led here, the group chat I wasn't part of, the tight smiles, the seat saver joke. They'd been laying the groundwork for this all along. And I'd ignored it because the alternative, believing my own daughter would deliberately leave me behind, was too painful to consider. I remembered the day I gave Maya that $2,500 for the trip, how she hugged me and called it the trip of a lifetime. Now I realized the lifetime she meant didn't include me. My mind kept trying to find a reason. Maybe there had been some emergency at the gate. Maybe they thought I'd already boarded somehow. But deep down, I knew. People don't accidentally leave someone for 8 hours without a single call or text. My phone lit up with a notification, and my heart leapt. But it wasn't Maya. It was a spam email about an online sale. The disappointment was so sharp, it felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I sat there in the quiet hum of the lounge, my suitcase beside me, feeling smaller than I had in my entire life. This wasn't just missing a flight. This was being told without words, "You are not part of us." And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be anymore. I must have sat in that lounge for another half hour after seeing the word "departed" on the board, just frozen. My hands were wrapped so tightly around the handle of my suitcase that my knuckles hurt. Finally, I forced myself to stand. I told the lounge receptionist I needed to check on my baggage. Maybe it had been checked in under my name. Maybe there was some mistake. The lost baggage desk was tucked in a quieter corner of the terminal. A woman in a Navy uniform greeted me with a professional smile and asked for my name and flight number. I gave her both, my voice unsteady. She typed something into her computer, frowning slightly. "Your name doesn't appear on the final boarding list," she said. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean? My daughter said she had my boarding pass." The woman hesitated, her fingers still on the keyboard. "It appears 2 passengers checked in under the reservation, Maya Carver and Ethan Carver. No additional travelers." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but the words felt like a knife. I stood there in stunned silence until I heard a familiar name behind me. 2 travelers, a middle-aged couple, were speaking to another staff member just a few feet away. "Yes, they were right in front of us in line this afternoon," the woman said. "That young couple, tall man, brunette woman, both well-dressed, they boarded right away. Didn't even glance back." I turned my head slowly. "Excuse me," I said before I could stop myself. "Did you say a brunette woman and a tall man?" The woman nodded. "Yes. I remember because she was laughing about something. They looked like they were in a hurry. Why?" I swallowed hard. "That's my daughter and her husband." The woman's eyes widened. "Oh. Well, I'm sorry. I just assumed you were with them." I thanked her quietly and walked away before she could say anything else. It was like someone had ripped away the last scrap of hope I'd been clinging to. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. They hadn't just forgotten to tell me the gate had changed. They'd walked through that jet bridge, smiling, laughing, knowing full well I was sitting in that lounge waiting for them. On my way back toward the lounge to collect myself, I passed by a wide glass wall that overlooked the gates. The memory hit me like a slap. Hours earlier, when I was nibbling on a cracker from the lounge buffet, I'd looked out and thought I'd seen Maya and Ethan walking across the bridge to a plane. I dismissed it at the time, telling myself it must have been another couple. Now I knew better. They had been right there, in my line of sight, and I hadn't even realized I was watching them leave me behind. The knowledge burned in my chest. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the casualness of it. The ease with which they could erase me from their plans, from their day, from their lives. When I finally sat back down in the lounge, my coffee cup still on the table, I felt different. The shock was still there, but underneath it, something else was forming. A clarity. This wasn't just about missing a flight. This was about years of being treated as optional, years of giving more than I got back, years of being told in small, polite ways that I mattered less than their convenience. And now, sitting there under the soft hum of the lounge lights, I realized something important. I might have been left behind, but I wasn't powerless. They thought I'd just sit here, broken. They had no idea what was coming next. I didn't leave the lounge right away. Part of me still felt glued to that leather chair, as if moving would somehow make the weight of what had happened crash down all at once. But something inside me had shifted. The raw, dizzying shock was giving way to something steadier, sharper. I stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at a plane taxiing into position. For a moment, I imagined Maya and Ethan on board their flight to Paris, flipping through the in-flight magazine, maybe ordering champagne, pretending this was just a normal vacation, pretending I didn't exist. And just like that, I stopped imagining. For most of my life, my default had been to excuse, to rationalize, to smooth things over so no one felt uncomfortable, even when it meant swallowing my own hurt. That was the role I'd played for decades as a mother, a wife, a friend. Keep the peace. Take the smaller piece of cake. Give up the good seat. Be understanding. But sitting there, watching that plane disappear down the runway, I realized that all those small concessions had brought me here, to a lounge where I'd been told to wait like baggage they didn't want to check. My chest still hurt, but the tears stopped. Not because it didn't matter anymore, but because crying suddenly felt like the wrong response. I took out my phone and opened my banking app. There it was. The $2,500 I'd transferred to Maya a month ago for trip expenses. Money I'd offered willingly, thinking it would make things easier for all of us. It was almost laughable now. I'd helped fund my own exclusion. A young lounge attendant stopped by my table. "Ma'am, do you need anything? A fresh coffee?" I shook my head. "No, thank you," I said, my voice calm. My calm surprised me. Once she left, I opened my notes app and started typing. Not a text to Maya. I wasn't ready for that. But a list of the things I'd done for her over the years without question, without repayment, without recognition. School tuition, rent when she was in between jobs, plane tickets home for holidays, all the times I'd said yes when I could have said no. I looked at the list and felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. For years, I'd been running on autopilot, believing that being endlessly available was the same as being loved. But love without respect isn't love. It's dependence. And dependence can be one-sided. That realization was both painful and freeing. Painful because it meant acknowledging that my daughter had been taking from me more than she'd been giving. Freeing because it meant I didn't have to keep letting it happen. I took a deep breath. The airport felt different now. Not like a place where I'd been abandoned, but like the starting line of something I hadn't planned but desperately needed. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew this. I wasn't going to call her. I wasn't going to chase after them. I wasn't going to explain myself. Instead, I was going to start thinking about my life without waiting for someone else to hand me a ticket. I zipped my trench coat, picked up my suitcase, and walked out of the lounge without looking back. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I booked myself a room at a modest airport hotel using the same credit card I'd used to help pay for Maya's trip. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, quiet, and mine. No one there knew me, and no one expected me to smile and pretend I wasn't bleeding inside. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, I thought about calling a friend to tell them what had happened, but the words felt too heavy in my mouth. It wasn't embarrassment holding me back. It was the realization that talking about it too soon would make me angry before I was ready. I didn't want anger to be my fuel. I wanted clarity, so I kept silent. In the morning, I took out my laptop and opened my banking app again. I canceled the joint credit card account Maya had access to, the one I'd opened years ago, to help her build credit. My finger hovered over the confirmation button for a moment, but then I clicked it without hesitation. Next, I moved $15,000 from my savings into a separate account under only my name. I'd been dipping into my retirement fund to help Maya and Ethan with little things, car repairs, holiday flights, even furniture. That was over. I also logged into my will and beneficiary account online. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady as I adjusted the allocations. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. If I mattered so little in their plans, I needed to start planning for myself. By noon, I'd booked a 1-week solo trip to Maine, somewhere I'd always wanted to go, but had never visited because I'd been too busy prioritizing other people's vacations. I chose a small coastal inn with a view of the water and a reputation for good tea. The confirmation email felt like more than just a booking. It felt like a stake in the ground. I didn't tell Maya. I didn't even hint at it. Instead, I sent her one short text. Hope Paris is everything you dreamed of. No question, no invitation to explain, just a simple sentence she could read however she wanted. Hours later, she replied, "Thanks, we'll call when we get back." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement that I hadn't been on the plane. It was almost impressive, the way she could erase me from her narrative so cleanly. Back at the hotel, I began writing in a small notebook I'd found in my bag. Not just about the trip, but about patterns, the ways I'd been sidelined before and hadn't seen it. I wrote about the seat saver joke, about the group chat I wasn't in, about the years of quietly absorbing little dismissals, because I loved her. I wasn't writing to wallow. I was writing to remember. The difference this time was that I wasn't planning to let the pattern continue. When I checked out of the hotel 2 days later, I didn't feel healed. Far from it, but I felt armed. Maya and Ethan didn't know it, but while they were sipping espresso in Paris, I was taking the first steps toward reclaiming the space I'd been giving away for years. And I had no intention of warning them about the change. It started 3 days into their Paris trip. I was in my kitchen, brewing a fresh pot of coffee, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Maya's name. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered with a calm, "Hello?" Her voice was brisk, but carried an edge of panic. "Mom, hey, weird thing happened. Our credit card got declined at the hotel this morning. I think there's some kind of issue with the bank. Can you just wire us a couple thousand to cover until we sort it out?" I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough for her to notice. "Oh? That's odd. Which card?" "The one you set up for emergencies," she said quickly. I kept my voice even. "That account was closed a few days ago. I didn't think you needed it anymore." There was a pause. Not long, but enough. Then, "Right. Well, I guess we'll figure it out." Her tone was sharper now, but underneath it was something else. Uncertainty. I didn't offer alternatives. I didn't apologize. I just said, "I'm sure you will," and ended the call. That was the first tug at the thread. 2 days later, another message came through, this time from Ethan. "Hey, Linda, not sure if Maya told you, but our hotel is holding part of our luggage until we pay the balance. Any chance you could send something over?" I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I went for a walk around my neighborhood, breathing in the crisp afternoon air. By the time I got back, I decided on my answer. "I'm sorry you're having trouble. I'm in the middle of some financial changes and can't help right now." No explanation. No promise to see what I could do. Just a boundary. And with every boundary I set, I felt something in me steadying. For years, I'd been the safety net, the person who could be counted on to fix things, smooth things over, make sure they were comfortable. Now, they were learning what it felt like to stand without that net. When they finally returned from Paris, I didn't rush to the airport to greet them. I didn't even answer Maya's first call. Instead, I waited until the next afternoon to return it. letting her voice go from cheery to clipped as she left a message. "We need to talk." By the time we finally saw each other, the shift in the air was almost tangible. We sat in my living room, and for once, I wasn't the one leaning forward trying to close the gap. Maya looked tired, irritated. Ethan avoided my eyes. "We had some challenges while we were away," she said carefully, as if testing the waters. I just nodded. "I'm sure you did." They were waiting for me to offer help, reassurance, maybe even guilt. But I didn't. I simply let the silence sit between us, and for the first time in years, they didn't seem so sure of themselves. It wasn't revenge I was after, it was balance. And the balance had finally begun to tip. They didn't expect me to be calm. I could see it in the way Maya's shoulders tensed when she walked into my living room, Ethan trailing behind her. They were bracing for an emotional explosion, for tears, accusations, maybe even begging. But I'd spent the last 2 weeks practicing something different: stillness. I sat in my armchair, legs crossed, a mug of tea cradled in my hands. The afternoon light slanted through the blinds, casting quiet shadows across the room. I didn't get up when they arrived. I didn't rush to hug them. Maya started first. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened." I sipped my tea. "We do." Ethan cleared his throat. "There was a mix-up at the airport." I cut in gently, my voice steady. "No, there wasn't." Maya blinked. "Excuse me?" I set the mug down on the side table. "You told me to wait in the lounge." "I waited for 8 hours. You checked in without me. You boarded without me. That's not a mix-up. That's a choice." The room went very still. Maya's lips parted like she was about to argue, but nothing came out. Ethan glanced at her, then looked at the floor. "I don't know what story you've been telling yourselves," I continued, "but I was there. I saw you walking to the gate. I didn't want to believe it at the time, but now I do. Completely." Her eyes darted toward Ethan before she tried again. "It wasn't like that, Mom." I raised a hand, not in anger, but in finality. "You don't need to explain. You've made it clear where I stand in your life, and I've made some decisions based on that." Ethan frowned. "What decisions?" I leaned back in my chair. "I've closed the joint credit account. I've moved my savings. And I've started booking trips for myself. Trips I won't be funding for anyone else." Maya's mouth tightened. "So you're punishing us?" I shook my head. "No, I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." Silence again. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind that forces people to sit with the weight of their actions. I reached into the side table drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside was my unused boarding pass for the Paris flight, crisp and untouched. I placed it on the coffee table between us. "This," I said, tapping it lightly, "is the last time I wait for someone who has no intention of coming back for me." Maya stared at it, her face shifting, a flicker of guilt, then defensiveness, then something unreadable. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the carpet. I stood, not to usher them out, but to signal the conversation was over. "You can go now. I think we've said what needs to be said." For the first time in years, I watched them leave without feeling the urge to chase after them. No part of me wanted to fix this right now. Maybe it could be mended in the future, maybe not. But either way, the terms would no longer be theirs to set. When the door closed, I picked up my tea again, still warm in the mug, and took a long, slow sip. It happened a few weeks after that living room confrontation. Life had begun to settle into a new rhythm. I hadn't heard much from Maya or Ethan, aside from the occasional clipped text. I could tell they were still nursing their bruised egos, but that was fine. I wasn't looking for reconciliation, at least not yet. Then one Tuesday morning, a plain white envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address was for the Paris hotel where they'd stayed. Curious, I opened it and found a formal letter demanding payment for an outstanding balance left unpaid. The bill, in bold print, read $1,842.50. I sat at my kitchen table and read it twice. The charges included additional nights, room service, and a late payment penalty. I almost laughed out loud. Apparently, my absence from the trip hadn't stopped them from living large, but it had left them with a tab they couldn't quietly cover. Not long after, Maya called. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mom, did you get anything from the hotel?" "I did," I said evenly. "A bill. Quite a large one." She exhaled sharply. "Okay, so here's the thing. They messed up with the credit card. We just need you to pay it for now, and we'll pay you back." I let the silence stretch. "No." Her voice sharpened. "No? Mom, this is serious. It could go to collections." "That's unfortunate," I replied, my tone calm but unyielding. "You're both adults. You made your choices. Now you can handle the consequences." She tried again, a mix of frustration and forced sweetness. "I thought family was supposed to help each other." I leaned back in my chair. Family is supposed to stand together, yes. They're also not supposed to leave each other behind in airport lounges. There was nothing but breathing on the other end for a few moments. Then quietly, "So you're just letting us deal with this?" "Yes," I said, "and I hope you learned something from it." Before she could respond, I added, "Oh, and I've spoken to my lawyer. I've updated my will. You're still in it, but things are different now. My assets will be distributed in ways that reflect the relationships I can rely on." That last part wasn't said with anger, just a simple, undeniable truth. And the truth has a way of landing harder than any insult. She hung up without saying goodbye. Later that afternoon, I mailed the hotel a brief letter explaining that I was not a party to the reservation and therefore bore no responsibility for the debt. I enclosed a photocopy of the reservation confirmation they'd sent me, showing only Maya and Ethan's names. It wasn't about revenge, it was about boundaries, the same boundaries that had been absent for far too long. A week later, I got a postcard from the Coastal Inn in Maine, where my upcoming trip was booked. The photo showed the rocky shoreline under a pink sunset. In neat handwriting, the manager had written, "We look forward to welcoming you, Ms. Carver." I pinned it to my fridge. That bill from Paris? I tucked it into the same folder as my unused boarding pass, a small private archive of the day I stopped being someone's afterthought. And for the first time in a long while, I felt not just free, but untouchable. It was early autumn when Maya showed up at my door again. I'd just finished watering the mums on my porch when I saw her car pull into the driveway. For a brief second, the old reflex kicked in, that hopeful flutter that maybe this time she was coming to make things right. But the moment passed. I didn't need that hope anymore. She stepped out holding a small bouquet of yellow roses. "Hi, Mom," she said softly, almost testing the air between us. I opened the door, but didn't step aside right away. "Hello, Maya." She glanced around the porch like she was looking for an opening. "Can I come in?" I considered it, then nodded. "For a little while." Inside, she placed the flowers on my kitchen table. "I thought you might like these. You always liked yellow roses." I gave a small smile. "They're lovely, thank you." I didn't rush to put them in water. I let them sit there between us, just like the words we both hadn't said yet. She cleared her throat. "Listen, I know things got messed up in Paris and before that. I just wanted to come by and, start fresh." I leaned against the counter, keeping my voice even. "Start fresh how?" Maya hesitated. "By maybe putting things behind us, getting back to normal." "Normal," I repeated. "Where I keep giving and you keep taking?" Her cheeks flushed. "That's not fair." "It's exactly fair," I said, still calm. "And it's why I'm not going back to that version of normal." She sighed, looking down at her hands. "I just don't want things to be so distant between us." I walked to the sink, rinsed my coffee cup, and set it on the drying rack before answering. "Maya, I'm not angry anymore. Truly, I'm not. But I've built a life these past few months that doesn't depend on whether you call or don't call, whether you include me or don't. I'm happy on my own terms now." Her eyes darted to mine. "So what does that mean for us?" "It means," I said, "that if you want to be in my life, it will be as equals. No more jokes at my expense. No more making plans that leave me out. No more treating me like a resource instead of a person. You want a relationship? You show up for it. Fully." She nodded slowly, her lips pressed into a tight line. I could see she was struggling, not just with my words, but with the fact that I wasn't bending the way I used to. After a long pause, she said, "I'll try." I gave her a gentle smile. "That's all I ask." She stayed for another 15 minutes, making small talk about work and the weather. When she left, I didn't feel the old ache I used to when the door closed behind her. I felt peaceful. The yellow roses stayed on my table, a reminder that people can return, but it's up to me whether they get to return to the same place they left. For the first time, I understood that reconciliation doesn't always mean going back to what was. Sometimes it means meeting again, but on entirely different ground. 2 months later, I was standing on the rocky coastline of Maine, the wind snapping at my scarf, the salt air sharp in my lungs. The ocean stretched out before me, endless and unapologetic. Waves slammed against the jagged rocks below, white spray shooting into the air before tumbling back down. It was the kind of beauty that doesn't ask for your attention, it commands it. I'd been at the small inn for 5 days, and each morning I came here. At first, I thought it was because the view was breathtaking. But now I realized it was something more. The sea was a mirror, restless, powerful, never waiting for permission to move. I sat on a flat boulder, pulling my coat tighter, and opened my journal. Its pages were nearly full now, not just with the story of Paris that wasn't, but with pieces of my life I'd never stopped to examine. Moments where I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. Years where I'd mistaken sacrifice for connection. I turned to the last blank page and wrote in neat, steady letters, "Sometimes losing your place in someone else's story is the only way to start writing your own." The wind lifted the corners of the page, almost as if it agreed. I thought about Maya. We'd spoken a few times since her visit with the yellow roses. Things were civil, even warm at moments, but there was no pretending that everything was as it had been. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I no longer lived in the space where I waited for her approval, where I shaped my days around her needs. If she called, I answered when I could. If she didn't, I still had my own plans. I had trips to take, books to read, new recipes to try. That quiet shift, that independence, was worth more than any apology she could have offered. A gull cried overhead, circling before diving toward the surf. I closed the journal and slid it into my bag, then reached into my coat pocket. My fingers brushed the edge of a folded piece of paper. It was the boarding pass from that day in the airport, creased now, the ink fading. I'd kept it, not as a wound, but as a reminder. A reminder that I'd waited once, far too long, for someone who had no intention of coming back. I held it out over the water. The wind tugged at it, and then it was gone, snatched from my fingers and carried high into the air before dropping toward the waves. It vanished into the foam in seconds. I felt lighter. Not because the paper was gone, but because I'd finally let go of what it represented. The sun was dipping lower now, staining the horizon in shades of gold and pink. I stood, brushed the sand from my coat, and started back toward the inn. My steps felt sure, my shoulders unburdened. Behind me, the tide kept coming in, unbothered, unbroken, and I realized I'd become a little like that myself. I didn't need to be part of every journey. I didn't need to be everyone's first choice. What I needed was to keep moving forward, even if I was the only one walking that path. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that.